Good day, this is Bennett, also known as Jeremiah. Today we're going to talk about counting principles. This is the fourth video of the playlist. I've designed the playlist in such a way that by the time you're done with this playlist, you will be good in counting principles, which is also known as probability grade 12. If you're interested in the playlist is found at the end of this video. It is also found right here on the top right of the screen at the suggested video. So, let's begin. Alright, let's say we have a certain business, and in this business every worker is identified by a 5-digit code. So let's say in this 5-digit code it is made up 2 numbers and 3 letters. So let's say the first 2 digits are numbers and the last 3 digits are letters. Then they ask you how many 5-digit codes can be created if both the numbers and the letters are not allowed to be repeated. So they are not allowed to be repeated, right? So both the numbers and the letters. So they ask you how many 5-digit codes can be formed if they are not allowed to be repeated. So every time they talk about digits, you'll always put dashes, right? So notice that the first 2 are numbers and the last 3 are letters. So what you fill in the dashes are strictly the number of choices. So for instance, in the first dash, how many choices do you have? So how many choices do you have? Notice that the first 2 dashes are made up of numbers, right? So they didn't give you restrictions. They just told you they're made out of numbers. So if they're made out of numbers, we have got 10 digits, right? From 0 to 9. These are 10 digits, including a 0, right? So in other words, in the first dash, we can choose any number from 0 to 9. So basically, we've got 10 choices, right? So every time they just tell you numbers, they don't give you restrictions. It's all the digits. So notice that in the first dash, we can choose any one of the 10, right? From 0 to 9. But it doesn't mean that we'll take all 10 and put it in one dash, right? So we're only going to choose one of the 10 choices we have. So in the next dash, since 1 is already used and we're not allowed to repeat it, for instance, if we choose 7, right, and we put it there, in the next one we can't choose 7 again. So basically, instead of us having 10 choices, now we will have 9 choices since they're not allowed to be repeated. So we're going to have 9 choices. So we're done with the numbers. Now let's talk about the letters. So they said the letters are also not allowed to be repeated. So in the first dash, how many choices do we have? How many letters can we choose from? Notice that they didn't give restrictions. They didn't say except vowels and stuff. They just said letters, meaning that you can choose any of the 26 alphabet, right? So since there are 26, you can choose any one of the 26. And since they're not allowed to be repeated, since one of them would have already been used here, now here we'll only have 25 choices. And since one of them will be used here, now here we've got 24 choices. So basically, after writing all these numbers, you just put multiplication sign. So remember, this is the topic where we literally write things like 1 grade 1. We literally write this, right? So the answer will be the answer to this. You just multiply them in the calculator and you get your answer. So now what about if they said the numbers are allowed to be repeated? If the numbers were allowed to be repeated, then it means in the first dash, if we can choose, since we've got 10 choices, right? We can choose any one of the 10 in the first dash. In the second dash, even though we've used 1, we can still use it again. So we still have 10 choices. So we're still going to have 10 choices. So then in the alphabet, let's just say they were not allowed to be repeated, but the numbers were allowed to be repeated. Then we'll just have 10 times 10 times 26, right? So times 26 times 25 times 24. So that's what we'll have. Now, what about if they say that the letters are allowed to be repeated, but the numbers are not allowed to be repeated? So since the numbers are not allowed to be repeated, we'll eventually have 10 in the first one, right? We can choose any one of the 10 in the first digit. But in the second digit, since 1 is already used, we can't use it again. So now we have only 9 to choose from. So it will be 10 times 9. Now, since the alphabet is allowed to be repeated, notice that in the first one, we can choose any of the 26 alphabet. In the second one, we can still choose any of the 26 alphabet because even though we've chosen one here, we can still use it again, right? So we can choose any of the 26. And then here, since we notice that we have used 2 of them here, right? But it doesn't mean we can't use them again, right? So even though we've used one here, it doesn't mean we can use them again. We can use it again, so we still have 26 choices. So this is what we have. So it will just be the answer will just be the answer to this. You just type this in a calculator and you have your answer. Now let's say in the same situation, right, we've got a 5-digit code. Let's just say we still have a 5-digit code made up of 2 numbers and 3 letters, right? 2 numbers and 3 letters. So let's say they ask you how many 5-digit codes can be formed if the numbers are only allowed to be even numbers, right? And the letters must not contain vowels. So let's start with the numbers. Even numbers from 0 to 9, how many do we have? We literally have 5 because we've got 0, rather 0, 2, then we've got 4, then we've got 6, then we've got 8, right? These are 5 even numbers. So basically, we can choose any one of the 5. Let's just say they say that both of them are not allowed to be repeated. So both the numbers and the letters are not allowed to be repeated. So since we have 5 choices here, we are going to choose one of the 5, right? So since one of them would have already been used, we can't use it again. So basically here we'll now have 4 even numbers to choose from. So remember we had 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, right? Now let's say we chose 2. So if we chose 2 in the first one, right, because we have got 5 choices, we can choose any one of the 5 in the first one. Now let's say we chose 2. Then in the next one, since 2 is used, we can use it again. So now we've got only 4 options to choose from. So let's go to the letters. So now they said they must not contain vowels. Vowels are A, E, O, U, right? Those are vowels. So there are 5 vowels. So in the alphabet we've got 26, right? We've got 26 alphabets. So now if they say they must not contain vowels, we have to subtract the vowels. So basically we now have only 21 options to choose from. So we can choose any one of the 21 consonants, right? We can choose any one of the 21. Now let's say they're not allowed to be repeated. So if we choose one of them, since one of them has been used, we can't use it again. So therefore this will be 20. And then since one is used, we can use it again. So now we'll have 19 left. And the answer is just the multiplication of this stuff. So there we have it. Just before I continue, if you want to be tutored, whether it is online or physically, whether it is the situation where you're struggling in maths or whether it is the situation where you're good in maths but want perfection, take a screenshot or save these details. Whether you're studying Cambridge, which is the UK curriculum, or whether you're studying NSC, which is the South African curriculum, or IEB, or native courses which start from N1 to N6, or any curriculum you're doing no matter which country you're at, we offer tutorials. We've got lessons and practice sessions 5 days a week. We also give you tests once a week so that we can check your improvement. Now let's go deeper. Now let's say in the same 5-digit codes, they ask you how many ways can they be arranged, and let's say they're not allowed to be repeated. So let's just say they're not allowed to be repeated. So they're not allowed to be repeated. So we still have 2 numbers and 3 letters. So now let's say they ask you how many codes can be formed if the first digit must start with an even number. So the first one must be an even number and the last digit must be a vowel, right? So the last digit must be a vowel. So every time they give you a restriction, you have to start with the restriction before you fill in the other places. So let's start with the restriction. So they say the first digit must be an even number. So in the first one, how many choices do we have? Remember, from 0 to 9, there are only 5 even numbers, right? 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, right? So we have 5 choices in the first one. We can choose any one of the 5 choices, right? We can choose any one. So we're going to have 5 choices right here. So we always start with the restrictions. So because they said it must start with an even number, we have to start with it. So how many choices do we have? There are only 5 even numbers from 0 to 9. So we have got 5 choices. Now they said it must end with a vowel, right? So it must end with a vowel. So how many vowels do we have? So we've got 5 vowels, right? So we've got 5 vowels. So since we've got 5 vowels, it means we've got 5 choices as well here. Then now we fill in the rest. So now we talk about this part, the numbers part. So notice that one of them has already been used, right? There are 10 of them, right? Now one of them has already been used. Yes, there are 5 choices, but not all 5 will be used at once, right? We're only going to choose one of the 5. So basically, there were 10 numbers here, but now one of them has already been used. Since they're not allowed to be repeated, we have 9. If they were allowed to be repeated, we would literally say 10 again. But now we still say 9. So now let's talk about the alphabet. So we have 26 alphabets, right? Now one of them will be used here, not 5. 5 is just the number of choices. We've got 5 options, but only one will be used here. So meaning that we'll be left with 24 that we can choose from, and then here's going to be 23. So the answer will be this stuff when you type it in the calculator. Now let's say they ask you, what is the probability that it starts with an even number and ends with a vowel? Just before we continue, if you're interested in knowing the prices of the tutorials, the video that contains the prices and the updated contact details, just in case these ones have changed, is found at the end of this video. So they ask you, what is the probability that the first digit is even and the last digit is a vowel? So probability is always equals to number of ways of something happening over the total sample space. It's not a must to write it like this. You can even write it in words. So probability, as long as you know that probability is number of ways over the total. So now they said, what is the probability that it starts with an even number and ends with a vowel? So the probability that it starts with even and ends with a vowel is the same as the number of ways that it starts with even and ends with a vowel, right? So the number of ways that it starts with even and ends with a vowel. So this that we calculated before is the number of ways. No wonder they ask you how many ways can they be arranged, right? So we just take the answer of this. So if we type this in a calculator, we'll get the answer. But because I'm not using a calculator, let me just type all this. So this is going to be 5 times 9 times 24 times 23 times 5, right? So the probability that it starts with an even number and it ends with a vowel is the same as the number of ways that it starts with an even number and ends with a vowel divided by the total when there are no restrictions. So if there are no restrictions, what would have been the total? So we've got 2 digits and 3 letters, right? So if there are no restrictions and they are not allowed to be repeated, how many can we choose? So in the first one, we can choose from any of the 10 digits, right? So we can choose from any of the 10 digits. And then in the next one, since they're not allowed to be repeated, we'll choose any one of the 9 digits, right? Because one of them would have already been used. Then this side, we can choose any of the 26 alphabets, but one of them would have already been used. So therefore, we're going to be left with 25 to choose. And then here, we're going to be left with 24 to choose. So this is the total when there are no restrictions. So the total when there are no restrictions depends on whether it's repeated or not repeated. If it was allowed to be repeated, the total when there was no restrictions would have been 10 times 10 times 26 times 26 times 26. So eventually it would have been 10 squared times 26 cubed, right? So that is how it is. So when you talk about the total when there are no restrictions, you have to consider the fact whether it's going to be repeated or not repeated. So here, since it's not allowed to be repeated, we have to take this. So this is going to be 10 times 9 times 26 times 25 and finally times 24. And the answer to this is the probability. So how you know you're correct is that the numerator must always be smaller than the denominator. Your answer should be from 0 to 1, right? So we should have 0 point something. Alright, in the next video, I will go deeper. I'm going to talk about numbers such as numbers, codes being greater than 5,000, and being even. Alright, we have reached the end of this video. I've included a playlist of similar type of questions. If you enjoyed this video, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Any questions you've got or any video you want me to create, please comment below. See you in the next video.